to the latest edition of the H podcast. This is not usually how we record or what we normally discuss, but as we are in these circumstances, why not make the most of it? So today we will be talking about life in lockdown, and our presenters today are Joe.
Hi everyone.
Caris. Louise.
Hi everyone.
Yasmin.
Hi everyone.
Destiny.
Hi.
Bobby. And me, Arian. And our special guests today are Mr. Pycroft.
Hello.
And Mrs. Darby.
Hola, buenos días a todos.
We hope everyone is well and safe. And I think we should start and begin with Louise.
Yeah, so just to start, I hope your family's doing well, and we just want to start off with kind of asking how you're coping in lockdown and what you're doing to occupy yourselves.
Mrs. Darby, would you like to go first?
Okay then. I've got plenty to do actually. It's quite therapeutic. I go for a daily walk. I've been sorting my garden out with my husband, getting rid of lots of things in the house as well, having to clear out, setting lessons for school, checking everybody's doing the lessons. I started learning Italian online, and what else have I been doing? Doing lots more cooking than normal, I suppose, and really developing new ways of teaching, and that's been okay. I'm not bored anyway.
And we've noticed that you've been doing recording your PowerPoints and speaking. How are they working for you?
Well, I think it's great, and I've been doing that. I don't know anybody's been at the receiving end. I don't teach any of you, but for me, I like it because it's as if you're in the classroom, and of course, with it being a language, it's really important for the pronunciation. But what I've also been doing for the sixth form, because we've got the year 11 who are doing the transition into year 12, I've been giving them their feedback as well on the Loom recording, so I can call up their work and then they can see it as I talk them through. And to be honest, it's a lot quicker than typing out loads of things. So you know me, I like to talk, so I really like the Loom recordings. But in our department, because we use a lot of, as we know, websites and things, Active Learn, and we use a lot of IT anyway, so I don't think the students have really missed out.
Well, that certainly sounds like in terms of what you've been doing for lockdown, madam, a lot more interesting and exciting than what I've been doing. I've been kept quite busy with work. Mrs. Darby has already sort of pointed out that some of our year 11 students now are starting the transition into sixth form, and that's required a bit of organising and a bit of sorting out, and obviously, you know, making sure that the classes that I teach are having their work set for them and so on. But the main thing that I've been doing with my time is lockdown has given me an opportunity to spend some time with my son, who is 7 months old now. So that's given me an opportunity to kind of see him develop and grow up a little bit, and he has developed an awful lot over the past 2 months, and that's probably, or a lot of that would have been something that I would have missed, or I certainly would have missed large portions of it if I was in work full time. So I'm trying to strike a balance between making sure I get all my work done for school, but making sure I have time to spend with my wife and my son. I haven't managed to yet start learning Italian or clearing out my garden. I'm hoping my wife doesn't hear me say that, because she'll now want me to clear out the garden.
Oh
but,
dear. My garden's ready for Chelsea. It's that good.
Mine is most definitely not. It's a good thing. It's a good thing this is an audio recording only, not a video recording. Otherwise, I'd be in trouble. But no, it's certainly been different. And I know, speaking to some of the teachers in school, you know, there have been good points to it. There have been positives, but there have also been some drawbacks. I'm probably subverting the norms of the podcast now, but if I could just ask the students, how have you all found it?
It was
Tell you what,
weird.
Ari, go for it.
It was weird to start off with, just trying to kind of work with technology a bit more. But now that we've done it for a couple of weeks, it's a bit easier. I think the weirdest thing is not being able to socialise as much as we used to. But again, we've got things like FaceTime and Snapchat to do that.
Yeah.
I think it was just a bit more difficult work-wise because, like, you might be doing the work at home and you're learning everything, but at the end of the day, when the way the teachers explain it and the methods that they teach us with, it makes a difference. You can tell how to answer questions better when the teachers explaining it to you and they're writing on the board and things.
Yeah, that's understandable.
True.
I think one thing that's worth, hopefully everyone's aware of this already, but sort of reminding everyone that listens to the podcast, teachers are setting you work and we are sort of chasing up if work's not submitted and everything, but I think teachers have a really realistic expectation for what students can achieve with the current arrangements. I don't think anyone's under the illusion that the learning you're doing at the minute is going to be the same as if it was in a classroom. We know that remote learning isn't the same. But certainly it seems that the vast majority of students are certainly making the best of this situation and really trying their hardest to keep up to date with their work through remote learning. So I know obviously, I don't want to speak on behalf of all the teachers, but everyone that I've spoken to has been really, really impressed with the way in which the students have adapted and almost kind of stood up to what is a really, really challenging set of circumstances for everyone. People have really kind of adapted and been quite flexible in their ways of working.
I would say as well, Mr. Pycroft, we're in a very good situation in our school that all the students are used to having their own laptop for work and everything for doing their work, and a lot of schools don't. And there's a lot of vulnerable students perhaps in other schools that can't do the work because they haven't got a device. So I think we are in a good position over other schools in many ways.
Very much so. My wife works in a school and her school weren't set up. They didn't have the technological infrastructure that we had in place. So whereas for our school, it like you say, it was a relatively seamless transition to remote learning, given that you say everyone had a device, we already had an online platform and Show My Homework. So actually all remote learning for us was a kind of extension of some of the things that we already do. But I do know there are many schools out there where they're not as fortunate as we are to have all that in place. And I think that's one of the sort of concerns nationally, isn't it? How do we make sure that every student across the country is having a similar experience during this time? And I think that's one of the real challenges that the government, teachers, schools are trying to face on a daily basis.
Shall we go with Joe? Joe, do you have any questions?
Okay, so this is for Mr. Pycroft.
Okay.
Because a lot of people have been asking about mock exams, and people are sort of asking, should they be revising in case there was a sort of return before the end of the summer holidays? So do you have anything you can kind of share about that?
Yeah, so in terms of mock exams, it is certainly still my preference and the school's preference that if we can fit a set of school exams in, that would be helpful. Obviously, in any normal year, the school exams serve two real useful purposes, which is A, that kind of evidence base for progression into year 13, but staff will also use the school exams in terms of influencing or informing their UCAS references and predicted grades. Obviously, that process is going to massively change for this year. I realise I'm doing that sort of politicians thing now where I don't really give a definitive answer, but the honest truth is until we know what the arrangements for going back to school will look like, I can't say definitively whether or not you will have an exam. What I would say is I'd like you to be able to do one because I think it's a really useful process, not just for the school, but for your own learning. In terms of whether or not you need to be revising now, again, there's the sort of two aspects to the answer. I would say, A, it's always worth reviewing everything you've done, particularly now, obviously, for you guys, where you've not actually been in school for a couple of months. I would say it's probably more important than ever that you're reviewing everything and you're going back through the work that you've done and you're making sure it's trying to keep it as fresh as you can in your minds. equally, what I would say is we're not just going to spring a mock exam on you with, just a few days' notice. The government's latest guideline says that Year 12 they hope that Year 12 will have some face-to-face contact before the summer. I've had a conversation with Mr. Tate, and the position we're in at the minute is we're awaiting further guidance. The guidance really isn't very clear for secondary schools at the minute, so we're not actually sure ourselves yet what that might look like for the summer holidays. But in terms of a school exam, if you are going to do a school exam, we would obviously make sure that you've got enough time to prepare. We wouldn't just kind of say, right, you've got to get ready for a school exam on Monday, because you wouldn't be able to perform in that exam, as you'd hope to, and that wouldn't be useful for anyone. So keep trying to stay on top of your work, but don't worry yourselves and stress too much about the school exam. If one does happen, you'll get plenty of notice in order to prepare for it.
Could I just join in there, Mr. Pycroft? Our Year 12 in Spanish, all two of them, but they're doing an online one next week, because the course that we teach has got, after each module, it's got an exam with it. So ours are actually doing a few exams next week because it just fits in. I mean, I don't know if other subjects use online courses like that, but we will be doing that next week. Obviously, we could produce a past paper if we were back in school, but this online testing does look at the skills of writing, listening, grammar, vocab. So it is quite a good assessment. I mean, do many subjects do that, Mr. Pycroft? Or
I don't know necessarily if many do the online aspect, like you said, but I do know from speaking to some colleagues in school, some departments are setting kind of almost, exam style assessments. Again, if we get to the point where it's, because I mean, the thing we have to keep in mind, again, following the usual school calendar, which is an assumption at this point, but the current Year 12s would have another school exam in January anyway. So depending on what the return to school looks like, there comes a point when actually, rather than trying to fit two school exams in, it might be that we actually do one. I don't know. So it might well be that actually, rather than do a proper school exam, departments look to assess students in different ways, like you've said, using maybe online assessments, or if there are other ways that departments can assess the students and get reliable information out of it. That's an option that we will consider if we need to. I do feel like this is a bit of a rubbish answer, really, because I know that students are looking for clarity and students want a degree of certainty. It's probably the question I've been asked the most by Year 12 over the past 2 months. And like I said, the only thing I can say for certain is that we won't just spring a whole week of exams on you with no notice. If we get a chance to do one, we'll make sure that you're given plenty of notice to prepare.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Mrs. Darby about the Year 11s, because they have, especially in Spanish, there's 4 different elements, and they're normally assessed. The speaking, you do it yourself with yourself, and the others we have in an exam room. So how has that worked for you?
Are you asking for the Year 11s how we actually decided on their final grades? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yes. Well, luckily we did a mock speaking, obviously in December, and we looked at the mock exams. But obviously they do one-to-one speaking every 2 weeks with Senor Amador as well. So when we had to look at, how they performed in homeworks and other assessments. But I didn't have a problem with it, really, because I know my class really well. And I think the grades that we've decided upon, myself, Miss Amador and Miss Anson sat down, and we really, and Miss Dunlop, and we looked at everything, and we feel we gave a fair grade based on a lot of evidence, really. Because as you know, you go out and do one-to-one conversation with Miss Amador on a regular basis. And hey ho, we've tried our best. But old Active Learn, as you know, does wonders. You can still do your reading and listening practice. There's so much out there, really. But it's all been done and dusted now. We've entered the grades. But I think they're fair.
I think the other thing that's worth mentioning is obviously because I think one of the concerns going into the process of schools calculating or suggesting the grades for students was how do you make it objective rather than subjective? And so what has been done, obviously, you know, the government have produced a lot of guidance on how schools should go about doing that. And so within school, there's almost been 2 steps to that process. So departments and teachers, like Mrs. Darby's just said, they've looked at a range of different pieces of evidence and then they've given the grade that they think that student would most likely have achieved if they would have sat their exams. And then there's been an internal moderation process whereby the senior leadership team of the school, so Mr. Tate, Mrs. Fisher and the heads of learning school, they've looked at the information and the data and kind of said, you know, does that seem reasonable? Does that seem like what we would expect? And then once that process is finished, then the exam boards will do the same things. The exam boards will look at our data and say, well, actually, would we expect Highfield School to get those results? So there's been a really quite rigorous process done to make sure that the grades that both GCSE and A-level students get are the grades that are fair and reflect as accurately as we can the grades that they would have achieved had they done their exams in the summer.
Yeah, and I think everyone, not just in our school, but of course across the nation, have been worried. But like you've reassured everyone, everything's been done fairly, so I don't think there's much to worry about.
No.
And I think, Caris, do you have a question?
Yeah, I've got a question, like general question. Is there do you guys have a worry about being able to get through all the content properly? Like, do you think there will be any drawbacks from timing lockdown?
That is a concern, Paris. I don't know if there's anything that'll be put in place. We don't know the answer. But certainly there's a lot of teaching time being lost, hasn't there?
Yeah.
So I'm not sure, Mr. Pycroft, if there's anything that we can do or offer any extra time next term, or has anything been discussed yet?
Again, nothing concrete, simply because you know, I'm going back to the same old sort of party line of we don't know what the future is going to look like. It's certainly the case that once we know what the future will look like, we will take steps to try and bridge that gap. But you are right that the amount of time that would have been lost, you know, it's looking like even if Year 12 do get in for a bit of time over the summer, over the summer term between now and the summer holidays, it's not going to be too much time that they've had between essentially March and September. So if you think, other than maybe a little bit of time in the summer term, that's 6 months, which is you know, a long time. Now we will do in school what we can. There'll be opportunities for catch up. There'll be opportunities for staff to revisit learning that, you know, students have done remotely at home and they might need clarification on. So we will certainly be doing everything we can to help bridge that gap. But ultimately, can we find 6 months worth of learning time? You can't magic that out of thin air. So you are right, and you know, it's a concern that we've all got as how we're going to get around that. The one thing I would remind everyone that hopefully will reassure you a little bit is that everyone up and down the country is facing this same problem. And so there's at least the silver lining, I suppose, is that there isn't this issue of disadvantage between different centres in different circumstances. Everybody's facing the same situation. And so when it comes to exams at the end of Year 13, which obviously the current Year 12s, I'm sure will have thought about and how is this going to impact them, everyone will be sitting those exams having had the same experience and the same build-up in terms of school closures and whatnot. So it might be that the exam boards, you know, have to review the exams for next year, but they've not said anything like that at the moment. I know that's one thing that people have suggested may happen, but we can only work off what they're saying at the minute. And at the minute, they're very much focused on this year. And equally, if we manage to get back to a degree of normality in September, it might well be that through catch-up, we can make that time up. But it's certainly something that the school are very aware of, and we're going to make sure that we do everything we can to help students catch up where they feel they need that additional support.
It might be easier as well for Year 12 to fit in some extra lessons. It'd be more difficult for Year 10 and Year 11 I'm just thinking, you know, there might be some way of with year 12, because they may not have a full timetable. Would that be correct, Mr. Mycroft? We might be able to, it might work out better for year 12, I think.
Quite possibly. I mean, given the fact that, like you say, you don't have a full timetable, there's study periods on there, there may be opportunities for you to dip back into next year, year 12 groups, depending on group sizes and so on. There's quite a lot of different creative things we can do, but I do think the one thing we need to, and the reason I brought that up is because a few students have asked me, do I think they're going to make changes to next year's exams? It might be something they consider, but equally, we can't really work with that in mind. We just need to consider what we can control at this point. And the things that we can control are the support that we offer you. And like Miss Darby says, there are a number of creative ways we can do that. And once we know when we're going to be back in school and how we're going to be back in school, we can start putting that support in place. The one to trying to put a more positive spin on it, obviously the year 7s and 8s have got 4 and 3 years respectively before they're going to sit their GCSE exams. What that does, that gives departments and it gives teachers time to kind of replan and rejig things around a bit. So what I suspect will be part of the planning for future years from this point, we're now going to have to maybe look at our schemes of work and our schemes of learning and think, well, actually, we can't just do things in the same timeframes and the same order we would have done. We're going to have to replan things to account for the fact that students have had this big chunk of time out of school. Again, that's something that, given that the younger years have got more time till their exams, there's a bit more flexibility for staff to do that. I suppose it's year 10 and year 12 who are doing their exams next year, where there isn't quite that same level of flexibility. So that's where we'll probably have to put more creative solutions in place to help you catch the time up, which I think that's reflected in the fact that the government would like year 10 and year 12 to go back to school first. That's clearly a recognition from the government that those are the 2 year groups who need to be the priority at the minute, because you've got assessments and exams coming up in the near future. But it's going to require a lot of creative thinking from the whole school, in terms of getting everybody back up and on track. It's going to be a real challenge, but we're confident that once we've got the right guidance and the right guidelines are in place, we'll be able to come up with a solution that works for everyone.
Yeah, I think it's not just, I think we're just going to go on to the next question, and I think it links quite well. It's not just about the education now in schools, it's about the social distancing and the other government guidelines. And I think Destiny was going to lead with a question about that.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, if we do go back to school, will the idea of social distancing be enforced?
These are questions I'm really going to be careful about what I say now, simply because obviously the school are having these discussions at the moment. I had a conversation with Mr. Tate earlier this week, and the one thing that we're absolutely clear on is that staff and students will not be asked to come back to school until we can guarantee their safety. Mr. Tate has said, the safety of the staff and the students and the parents as well, the whole sort of school community, is the absolute priority. Now, social distancing in particular as a specific measure is really interesting, because on the one hand, it seems that that's a really important step in order to make public places safe, but on the other hand, that's going to be a real challenge in a school of our size where you have 1,500 people in the building. So I think this is where, when I said earlier, we're awaiting further clarification on the government guidance. It's because at the minute, it's questions like, how do we socially distance in school, that we're not 100% certain we've got all the information we need before we can start to put those plans in place. So we're hoping that that information will be forthcoming. And I don't know how many of you are regularly reading the government's website, but to be fair to the government, they are sort of producing new guidance almost on a daily basis now. So each day we're getting emails coming in with more points clarified and more information given. There is possibly an argument to be made that the details should have been decided before the announcement was made, but let's not turn this into a critique of the government's performance.
There's a big meeting today as well, isn't there, with the unions and the public health and government representatives. There's a big meeting today, so we may know more if we watch the news tonight.
Absolutely. I mean, teachers in the media have been kind of made out over the last few days, you know, as certain aspects of the media, at least, as like obstacles to schools coming back. And I don't think that's the case. It's just that the whole profession, as I'm sure, you know, the students, well, they want to make sure that the schools are a safe environment for staff and for students. And we just don't want to ask anyone to come back to school until we can be confident that that's the case.
Yeah, I think, like you said, there's around 1,500 kids in our school, and we've had up to like classes of 30 in one classroom, and then you have double rooms and lecture theatre and things like that. So I think it's just about the safety of not just the teachers, well, not just ourselves, but the teachers as well.
I think going back, sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, go on, sir.
I was just going to say, going back to what I said earlier, it's probably just a case that we will have to think a bit more creatively about how we do things for a while. These issues are not, you know, they're not unsolvable. I don't know if is unsolvable a word. Yeah. You're going to tell me unsolvable is not. Unsolvable is a word. They're not unsolvable issues, but we are going to have to think a bit more creatively. I know reduced class sizes might be something that schools have to do, staggered times of the day, these different kinds of things. They're all options that, you know, we're willing to look at. We just need to wait and see what the government recommend before we start putting those plans together.
Yeah, I think, Bobby, did you have a question?
Yeah, my question is there a possibility that parents may not want to send their kids as a result of being concerned about the coronavirus? And if a large proportion of parents don't send their kids to school, would that not disadvantage them if they're not getting the same learning that everyone else is?
Absolutely. It's a very important question. It's one of the many things that I know at the minute the unions and teachers are seeking clarification from the government. In terms of students coming to school, the government have said explicitly that they won't be punishing parents if they don't send their child back to school. So then that does open the door for the possibility that perhaps some parents won't feel comfortable with that. Obviously, again, I think what we would say as a school is that we will only ask students to come back to school when we're confident we can, you know, ensure their safety. So hopefully, when we do eventually reopen the school to groups of students, we're in a position to provide parents with the reassurance that their child would be safe coming into school. I think that's the position we'd like ourselves to be in. But yeah, you're right. There might well be parents who decide that they don't want to send their child to school, and then that does create that kind of, well, some students are at home, some students are in the school. Is that how we're going to make that work? Again, I think we're quite fortunate at Highfields in that our remote learning systems are so well established that actually, given a bit of contact with your teacher and access to show my homework, you can probably, you know, your learning isn't hugely impacted upon. Again, it's the schools where they don't necessarily have that level of infrastructure. It's the schools where students don't have a laptop at home, they don't have internet at home, they haven't got show my homework or SharePoint. Those schools in particular are going to have to really consider how they make sure the students working remotely are getting that same level of education. But it's a really, really difficult balance to strike, I think.
Could I ask a question? If you've got younger brothers and sisters at our school, how are they coping, you know, the younger ones with the work? Do any of you have any younger brothers and sisters at high school?
I think I have a younger brother who's in year 8.
Yeah, how's he coping with it all?
I think it's a bit different in year 8 because the way that they work and the work that's set, because they have up to nearly 5 less different classes in a day. So I think he's struggling what he needs to prioritise over to get done. And I think there's some subjects where you have to be creative and things. I think that takes more time. And it's just sticking to that 9 to 3 timetable almost, because I don't think anyone's been waking up super early and then going to bed super early. And I think it's just making sure that we all stick to what we're normally used to, so we can just continue the day as if we were at school.
Yes, I think for years 7 and 8, I've found it a little bit more difficult because they've got, as you say, 5 different subjects and they have to really get up, and really they should be there ready to start at 9 o'clock, but that doesn't always happen, does it? and then they get into a mess, don't they, later on in the day. Yeah, it's tricky.
And I think it's just about making sure the work's done more than anything.
Yeah. Interesting.
Joe, do you have a question? I think we're going on our final question now.
Okay, so is there anything that you guys are like really looking forward to once all this is over?
And obviously,
Mrs. Darby, you go first.
Sorry.
You go first,
looking
Mrs.
forward
Darby,
to meeting all the students face to face. Yeah, but on a personal point of view, obviously seeing some members of my family and getting my hair cut. I haven't had my hair cut for 2.5 months. You know me, I like my hair looking good. So that's my worst bit. I need my roots doing.
What am I looking forward to? Well, from a school perspective, I'm looking forward to seeing colleagues, friends that I haven't been able to see for a long time, but the students as well. I think we possibly take one another for granted a little bit when we see each other every day, and often we don't necessarily appreciate just how nice it is to go to a school where the vast majority of staff and students get along really well and work together really positively. And, it has been difficult not being in school every day and not having that kind of interaction with all the people that you used to see so frequently. So in that sense, I am looking forward to going back to school and seeing everyone and hopefully making sure everyone's okay and getting back to a degree of normality. On a personal level, it's interesting actually, I'm just looking for it now in my dining room. My wife made a I wish we could jar, which the idea being that throughout lockdown, whenever we decide we want to do anything, we write it on a piece of paper and we pop it into the jar, and then when lockdown's finished, we can open it and we can see all the different things that we wanted to do. I think all I've really added to it at the minute is go to McDonald's and go on holiday. So I think I need to perhaps get a bit more creative with what I would like to do. I think if I had to pick one thing, I'd like to be able to take my son out and do things. So at the minute, it's really nice spending time with him, but we can't really go out and see things. And I'd like to be able to go out and take him places and see different things with him.
Talking about holidays, Senora Darby, do you have anything planned?
Oh, I've had to cancel 3. Well, I've had to not go on 3. No, I haven't booked anything. Can I? So I missed out on a trip to Sicily, a trip to Spain, and a trip to Ireland in the last 2.5 months.
Oh.
Hey ho! I'm just thinking of the money I've saved, and I'm ready to travel once this is all finished. I'll tell you. But I think it's going to be Costa di Inghilterra this year, by the looks of things.
I think we're going to end it here then. I hope everyone's enjoyed listening, and they've some topics that they've been confused with have been clarified, and we'd like to thank our special guest speakers, Mrs. Darby and Mr. Pycroft.
It's been lovely talking to you. Very nice.
Yes,
thank you for setting it up. Yeah,
and thanks for listening, guys.
Thank you. Stay safe.
You.
Stay safe, everyone.
Adios.
Adios.
Bye. Cuidaos.